The dimly lit Hampshire tavern was a welcome sight to Aedan as he walked through its creaking door. The long days of travel had taken their toll, and the weight of his sword felt heavier than ever. His clothes were still caked with road dust, and a deep weariness clung to his bones. Yet even as he entered, the murmurs of worry and the distant looks of the patrons told him that the rest would only be temporary. These were dark times, and danger loomed closer with each passing day. He approached the bar, his steps slow but purposeful. The bartender, an older man with graying hair and a weathered face, looked up from polishing a wooden tankard. His eyes met Aedan's, and he nodded in understanding, sensing the weight the younger man carried.
"Looking for a room, lad?"
The bartender asked, his tone gruff but friendly.
"Yes.
Aedan replied, his voice quiet but clear.
A room and a drink."
The barman pointed to the key hanging on a hook behind him.
"One room left. It seems your luck is with you. The room will cost you 2 pennies, and I will get you a drink."
Aedan slid the cash over the bar and pocketed the key with a gesture of gratitude. He leaned against the bar while the bartender poured foaming beer into a wooden tankard. He accepted the tankard gratefully, relishing the first taste. It was bitter and forceful, exactly what he needed to get rid of his lethargy. As he drank, the low hum of conversation in the tavern grew louder. Talk of war, bloodshed, and impending horror filled the air like thick fog. Aedan turned to the barman, who had returned to wiping down the bar.
"What news?"
Aedan asked quietly, though he already had a sinking feeling in his chest. The barman's face darkened, and he glanced around to make sure no one was listening too closely.
"The Vikings, lad. They've retreated for now, but only because they have greater prey, Winchester. King Alfred is gathering men from all over Wessex, calling them to arms. The city is besieged, and it won't be long before Guthrum's forces overwhelm it, unless reinforcements arrive."
Aedan clenched his jaw. Winchester was the heart of Wessex, and if it fell, the kingdom would follow. His thoughts returned to his village, to the charred remains of his houses and the bloodied bodies of his men. The Vikings had taken so much from him already, and now they were closing in on the capital.
"And Alfred?
Aedan asked, his voice harsher than before.
Is he coming to help the city?"
The barman nodded grimly.
"I suppose so, with enough swords. But the Vikings, they've grown bold. Guthrum himself is coming from York with his chieftains, already laying waste to Mercia. All of eastern England is almost lost in fire and blood. If Wessex falls, well, they say all of England will soon be Guthrum's."
Aedan gripped his tankard, his knuckles white with the strain. The thought of Alfred, England's last hope, being crushed by the Danish horde filled him with a sense of urgency. Cormac had always spoken highly of King Alfred, a man of strategy and wisdom who had held Wessex together even as other kingdoms fell to the Vikings. He couldn't sit idly by while such times came.
"There's a recruiting party,"
the barman continued, leaning closer.
"Men from every village in Wessex are being called to fight. Alfred needs all the swords he can muster. If you have a strong arm, you may go."
Aedan nodded slowly, his mind racing. The way forward was clearer now. Nuada's sword, a gift from the goddess Danu, weighed lightly at his side, reminding him of the responsibility he now bore. He was not simply fighting for vengeance, he was fighting for something greater. The gods themselves had set these tests for him, and it was time for him to face them.
"Where should I go to sign up?"
he asked, his voice firm and determined. The barman straightened and pointed to the door.
"A captain stands in the town square, mustering men as we speak. You will know him by his banner, the Golden Dragon of Wessex. He will accept you if you agree."
Aedan drained his drink and slammed the mug down on the table. He glanced up the stairs to where his room awaited, but rest would come later. The war was already at his door, and Winchester, the heart of Wessex, would not stand for long without help. He turned to the barman, gratitude flickering in his tired eyes.
Thank you.
Aedan said simply, before heading for the door. The barman watched him go, shaking his head slightly.
Good luck, lad. The gods watch over you.
When Aedan stepped out into the cold night air, he headed toward the square, the weight of his journey weighing heavily on his shoulders. The news of the siege and of Guthrum's impending invasion had filled him with dread, but it had also ignited something fierce within him. The gods had chosen this moment for him to act. He was no longer a boy floating helplessly on the river, and it was time to fight for the land that had given him new life. The night air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and anticipation as he approached the town square. The dim light of torches flickered across the faces of the gathered men, their expressions grim yet resolute. A large crowd had formed, all of them answering King Alfred's call to arms. The sound of muffled conversations and the occasional clatter of armor filled the square as men from all corners of Wessex prepared to join the fight for their homeland. In the center of the square, a long wooden table had been set up, and a few royal guards in their crimson tunics stood beside it, keeping order. At the table, a scribe sat with a quill in hand, diligently recording the names of those who stepped forward. Aedan took a deep breath, steeling himself, and moved toward the front of the line. As his turn came, he stepped forward to face the man behind the table. The scribe, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a serious expression, looked up briefly before dipping his quill into the inkwell.
Name?
The scribe asked without looking at him directly, his eyes fixed on the parchment.
Aedan.
He answered, his voice steady. The scribe nodded, scribbling the name down.
Age?
20.
Aedan replied. The scribe wrote it down without hesitation.
Do you have armor?
The man asked, finally lifting his gaze to meet Aedan's. Aedan shook his head.
No, I don't.
The scribe sighed, motioning to one of the guards standing nearby. The guard, a burly man with a thick beard, stepped forward and handed Aedan a light outfit, a leather cuirass and a small shield. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to offer some protection in the coming battle.
Make do with this.
The guard grunted, his voice rough but not unkind.
Gather at dawn. We march to Winchester, King Alfred's orders.
Aedan nodded and slung the armor over his shoulder, feeling the weight of responsibility settle further on him. He backed toward the tavern. His mind buzzed with thoughts of the coming battle, but exhaustion had finally set in. He would need rest before the morning, but the tension in the air made it difficult to shake off the looming threat. The first light of dawn barely crept over the horizon when Aedan emerged from the tavern, already dressed in the leather armor he had been given the night before. The square was now filled with men ready to march, some carrying swords, others spears. But they all shared the same determined expression, united by a common purpose, to defend their kingdom and King Alfred from the invading Vikings. A trumpet sounded, signaling the time to move out. He fell in with the crowd, his eyes scanning the faces of the men around him. Some were farmers, others blacksmiths like himself, but all were now warriors in the army of Wessex. They marched through the winding roads toward Winchester. By midday, the army stopped at a ridge overlooking the city of Winchester. From the distance, Aedan could see the imposing walls of the city, and just beyond them, the faint trails of smoke where the Vikings had besieged the city for days. The soldiers murmured among themselves, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. As they waited, Aedan's attention was drawn to the sound of hooves on the dirt road behind him. He turned to see a stately figure approaching on a magnificent white horse. The man was dressed in fine chainmail armor that gleamed in the morning sun, and a royal blue cloak billowed behind him. His face was stern, with the weight of command etched into every line. This was King Alfred, the ruler of Wessex. Surrounding him were his personal guard, heavily armed warriors, their armor shining and shields emblazoned with the gold. King Alfred rode slowly through the ranks, his presence commanding respect from all who looked upon him. His guards remained close, but their focus never wavered from the task at hand. When he reached the front of the gathered men, Alfred surveyed them with a calm but determined gaze. Though the king said nothing, his silent appraisal filled Aedan with a renewed sense of purpose. The army, now fully assembled, began to move toward Winchester. The journey felt long, with every step bringing them closer to the besieged city. As they approached the city, a murmur ran through the ranks. The Vikings seemed to have already lifted the siege. Word had spread that the clans had decided to join forces with Guthrum, the Danish king coming from Mercia. Although there was no battle, it was a victory nonetheless. The threat had been averted for now. When the army reached Winchester, the streets were filled with townspeople cheering the arrival of their king. They had feared the worst, but now that the Vikings were gone and Alfred stood at their gates, hope returned. Aedan watched as the people of Winchester cheered, their relief palpable. For the first time in days, there was no smoke rising from the rooftops, no cries of terror, only joy and gratitude for the arrival of their king. When Alfred and his guard entered the city, they gathered everyone who could hold a sword, and they advanced to Edington, which was the largest Viking city in the east. As King Alfred approached Edington, he rode silently ahead of his army, keeping a keen eye on the surrounding area. The high ground stretched out before him, giving him a distinct advantage in height over the Viking forces gathered below. His scouts and reconnaissance brought him alarming news. Guthrum, the Danish king, had joined forces with other Viking clans from the north, adding to his ranks. It was clear that the Vikings, encouraged by their previous successes, were confident of victory over the Anglo-Saxons. However, Alfred knew that brute force would not be enough to achieve victory. He had carefully chosen a strategic position on the high ground, knowing that the Vikings would have difficulty mounting an effective attack from above. The high ground provided both a defensive advantage and a clear view of the battlefield. From there he could see the enemy gathering at the foot of the hill, preparing to advance. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Alfred gave orders to his commanders. He placed his royal guard, his most elite and battle-hardened soldiers, in the center of his line, ensuring that the shield wall in the middle was solid and nearly impenetrable. On the flanks, he placed light infantry, mostly urban levies and hastily assembled militia, who were neither well-trained nor well-armed. These men were vulnerable, but essential to holding the line. Alfred also kept a small reserve force hidden behind the main line, ready to respond to any weaknesses or gaps that might appear in his defenses. He knew that patience and timing would be the key to surviving the Viking onslaught. The Vikings, seeing the Saxons positioned on the hill, gathered at the foot of the hill, watching and waiting. Their numbers were overwhelming, and their troops were eager to fight, but Guthrum held them back. The Danes were in no hurry to attack. They had the advantage in numbers, and believed that the Saxons would eventually be exhausted or forced to retreat. The air was tense as the two armies sized each other up. Alfred, feeling the need to provoke the Viking horde, gave the order to begin firing at the enemy. His archers and light troops hurled spears and arrows from the heights, peppering the Viking ranks. It was not meant to inflict heavy casualties, but it succeeded in enraging Guthrum's warriors. The taunts and jeers of the Saxon ranks, combined with the stinging fire of arrows, provoked the Vikings. Their pride wounded, they roared in rage and charged forward to engage. With a deafening sound of the horn, the Viking army moved up the hill. Alfred's centre held firm. His royal guard, trapped in a dense shield wall, stood their ground against the vicious Viking assault. The Danes, driven by their anger, crashed into the shield wall, but Alfred's centre did not break. The guards fought with discipline and precision, forcing the Vikings into a grueling battle that favoured the Saxon defence. On the flanks, however, the situation was dire. The light infantry, poorly trained and lightly armed, could barely withstand the Viking onslaught. The enemy broke through the front ranks, and soon one flank began to waver. The left flank began to buckle under the pressure, men screaming as the Vikings pushed them back. Fear gripped the militia, and some began to retreat in disarray, threatening to collapse the entire line. Aedan, standing at the rear, saw the chaos unfold. His eyes blazed with determination. Grabbing the sword his mother, the goddess Danu, had given him, a blade of legend and power, he charged the left flank without hesitation. His heart burned with the memory of his slain father, his village and Cormac. He could not let these invaders take more from him. With a mighty cry, Aedan charged into battle, his sword cutting through the Vikings with unmatched precision. The legendary blade, said to be unstoppable, tore through the enemy lines like a scythe through wheat. Viking after Viking fell before him as he fought with a ferocity and skill that left those around him in awe. His strength was like that of a storm, and he seemed invulnerable as he moved across the battlefield, a living embodiment of war. The sight of Aedan's bravery had an immediate effect on the retreating soldiers. The reservists waiting behind the line saw his heroic stand and rushed forward to support him. Bolstered by his leadership, the reserve forces crashed into the Vikings with renewed vigor, stabilizing the left flank. Meanwhile, the Vikings were exhausted. Their climb up the mountain had sapped their strength, and the initial fury of their attack had given way to despair. Guthrum's warriors, exhausted by the grueling attack, struggled to maintain their momentum. Alfred, who had been watching the battle closely, recognized this critical moment. He knew the Vikings were about to break. With a voice that cut through the din of battle, Alfred shouted his order.
Now we charge.
The entire Saxon army, encouraged by the sight of the weakening Vikings, rushed forward in a single counterattack. The shield wall that had been holding out now broke through, crashing into the exhausted Viking ranks. The Danes, already exhausted and demoralized, were no match for the Saxon advance. Their ranks crumbled and panic spread through their ranks. Realizing that they were outnumbered, the Vikings began to flee in disarray, retreating down the slope. Many were cut down as they tried to flee, while others were driven back to their stronghold, where they sought refuge. Guthrum himself barely escaped, retreating with the remnants of his army to the safety of the citadel. Alfred, sensing victory was at hand, immediately ordered a siege of the Viking stronghold. His army, now united and confident, surrounded the fort and cut off Guthrum's supply lines. Over the next few weeks, the Vikings, trapped and starving, were forced to surrender. The battered Danes knew they could not continue their campaign, and King Alfred seized the moment to secure a lasting peace. In a makeshift tent pitched on the outskirts of the Viking camp, Alfred stood before Guthrum, the once proud Viking king who now seemed tired but still defiant. Alfred.
Guthrum, you have fought bravely, but your gods have abandoned you today. I have spared your life, but Wessex will not suffer another attack from your people. We have shed enough blood.
Guthrum, his voice hoarse but resigned.
The Norns have spun their thread, and you have won today. What do you want from me, Alfred of Wessex?
Alfred, his gaze unwavering.
First, you will lay down your arms and swear never to raise them against Wessex again. You will return to East Anglia and take your troops with you. Wessex will remain free, and you will surrender to me the southern half of Mercia.
Guthrum,
And if I agree, what of my warriors?
Alfred,
You and your men will be given food and supplies, and you will all be released. But there is one condition. In addition to land and peace, you and your leaders, Guthrum, will be baptized into the Christian faith. You will no longer be an enemy of God.
There was a long pause. Guthrum looked at his remaining warriors, their spirits broken by the siege. A mixture of bitterness and understanding flashed in his eyes. He knew he had no choice. Guthrum, nodding slowly.
If you want peace, I will accept your terms. We will accept your God as our own, and I will cease all raids on Wessex. But know this, Alfred, this peace will not last forever. Another will rise.
Alfred, calmly but firmly.
If another rises, Wessex will be as ready as it is today. Swear the oath, Guthrum, and I will let you and your men go.
With no other choice, Guthrum and his leaders agreed. They were baptized into Christianity, and the Treaty of Wedmore was signed, setting the boundaries and ensuring peace between the Saxons and Danes for the time being. The Viking king, now baptized, submitted to Alfred's terms and retreated from the lands he had once ravaged. The Battle of Edington was won, and with it the fate of Wessex was secured. Alfred's victory not only saved his kingdom from destruction, but also paved the way for the eventual unification of England. A few days later, while the Saxons celebrated their victory and peace was restored to Wessex, Alfred held court at his camp at Edington. Word had spread of the heroism displayed during the battle, especially by one warrior on the left flank. Curious and impressed by the stories, Alfred called the young warrior to him. Aedan, still battle-weary but holding himself upright, entered Alfred's tent. The king, dressed in simple but royal robes, motioned for him to approach. Alfred.
You must be Aedan. I have heard tales of your bravery during the battle. Some say the left flank would have been broken if not for your intervention. I have watched the battlefield, and I must say that your skill with a sword is unlike anything I have ever seen.
Aedan, modestly.
My lord, I fought like any other man to defend my land. The left flank was in danger of falling, and I did what I could.
Alfred, nodding.
And what you did was beyond the hopes of many. You fought with the spirit of 10 men. Tell me, where are you from, Aedan?
Aedan.
I come from a small village outside Exeter, my lord. I am a blacksmith, or was. My father taught me smithing and fighting, but
Voice falters momentarily.
he was killed by Vikings when they attacked our village. That day I swore to fight them and avenge his death.
Alfred's gaze softened as he listened to the young man's words. He saw before him not just a warrior, but a man shaped by loss and driven by honor. Alfred.
My condolences, Aedan. Your father must have been a fine man to raise such a brave son as you. Know that Wessex needs men like you, strong in spirit and arms. The Vikings may have retreated for the moment, but we must remain ever vigilant.
He pauses, looking thoughtfully at Aedan.
I would like you to join my personal guard, Aedan. Your skill in battle is undeniable, and I believe you could serve Wessex well at my side.
Aedan paused for a moment, considering the king's offer. The chance to stand among Alfred's elite to fight alongside the king who had saved Wessex, it was a great honor. Aedan.
I would be honored, my lord. I came here to avenge my father, but I see now that there is still more to fight for. Wessex and the people who call it home need protection from those who would seek to destroy it. I will serve you.
Alfred smiled, clearly pleased with Aedan's answer. Alfred.
Then it is decided. You will join my personal guard, and in doing so you will fight for more than vengeance. You will fight for the future of Wessex.
Aedan bowed low. His heart swelled with purpose. His path had been unexpected, but now his journey as the protector of Wessex had truly begun.